Hey there, everybody. This is Kenny with another episode of the Yak with Mac. We hope you're having a phenomenal start to the year. And I have to tell you, man, this is the place. Hopefully you watched the last couple of episodes and saw some of the guests that we're going to line up. Liz, Patrick, what a phenomenal job they did. I'm speaking to a great leader in the company tomorrow. We'll have that out to you next week, and we'll sprinkle in some great leaders to give you some great advice so you're not just hearing from me. So, okay, really quick, let's go with my advice for you, right, to start out with. Well, first of all, this is a place where we want to encourage and inspire you to just become better influencers and better leaders. Second thing is leader ready. Hopefully you have already registered. There's tons of classes out there. I saw them the other day myself. Hopefully also, if you watch Patrick's podcast with me, that you have got maybe some interest in that lead program. Is launching on the 16th. So make sure there's a ton of information that's out there. Speak with your leader. That is the first thing and first place to go if you have some interest in that great program that's going to be using a lot of tools and resources to really help you develop. Speaking of that, 15 minutes a day. I used to say 10, 15 minutes a day at least for you to develop yourself, do something that is going to help you develop into being a better leader. Okay, we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. In fact, we have a great podcast on the Learning Podcast site that really goes into great detail on that. We get some other folks from outside the company to come in and speak about that. It's all over the place, and it just makes good business sense for you, right? However, it was disappointing for me to hear on John Fryer's call this past week that there are still a lot of folks out there that was texting him that felt like we're not doing our best as a company when it comes to diversity and inclusion and being inclusive. I'm going to use that word a lot over these next 10 minutes or so, being really an inclusive leader. And so I think that if you came from Sprint and if you're looking to just hire Sprint people when you have an opening, well, you're eliminating half of the pool. And that can never be a good thing. And if you came from T-Mobile and you have an opening and you only want to talk to T-Mobile people, well, you're also eliminating half of the pool, which is not a good thing. You're limiting yourself from getting the best possible candidate for the position. And you're also limiting yourself to get someone that might have some new, fresh ideas, that maybe thinks differently than you think, that maybe thinks different from the rest of the team, that can maybe bring some fresh ideas to the table. There are so many benefits to being inclusive. It is way too many to list. If you're a leader in 2021, this is a quality that it's a non-negotiable. It can't be that, hey, I'm going to be a little bit inclusive. No, you've got to be just crazy inclusive, but that's got to be within here. I can't really tell you, neither can leaders tell you to do that, right? That's got to be within here. You've got to really settle it in here and then up here for the reasons why being inclusive is a great thing for you, for your progress, for your store, for your district, for your area, whatever you're assigned to. Being inclusive, it just works. It really does. There's never any time in the history of our company or any company that a leader stood up and said, I'm way too inclusive, right? I think you can't have enough of that. And I'm going to give you some real specifics today in 3 areas: language, communicating, as well as really having some authentic behavior that's going to help you be more inclusive. So this is an article I ran across this weekend, my 15 minutes, right? I ran across an article on the Harvard Business Review, and I'm going to share highlights of that article. So I want to give them full love. I'm going to add some of my own words to it, but I want to give them full love here about some of the things I'm about to tell you. So when it comes to inclusive language, let's also talk about what non-inclusive language looks like. And so a lot of these are very little things that we've talked about some of them, but they're very little things in terms of, all of us have probably said these things before without really wanting to cause any harm. And that's not really what you're doing, but we're going to talk about the opposite of really using some more powerful language and powerful words that will make you more inclusive with your language, right? So when you say, I am proud of the team, when you say I, you're excluding. You're saying I, right? Now, while all of us are guilty of that, it's something that you are saying and now you're owning. It's I. It's not inclusive of the whole team. But when you say, hey guys, together we made such a phenomenal difference, that is a big, big difference, because together people are going to say, wow, okay, he or she said we did it together. You say I, it's kind of like, okay, I did it. You guys were along for the ride, but I did it. Okay. If you say something like, hey, we don't have enough manpower, or the manpower in this organization is phenomenal. Either way, that word manpower, and I didn't do that segment at the beginning, but on purpose, because manpower, that should go out of our language. Why? Because if you identify as a man, that excludes everybody else, right? So if you say manpower, what does that really mean? So what can you say instead? Well, the talent in this group is really phenomenal. We really can handle it, or we really can't handle all of the work that we have. We need to get more talent on board. A much, much better way instead of saying manpower. I'm guilty of this because I can remember things from the 70s when I was a little kid, but I clearly can remember things from the 80s, 90s, thousands, and I'll reference those. And I always say this. I'll say, hey, some of you are a little too young to remember this. That's not a really good thing to say, right? Because now I'm like excluding folks that are too young to remember it, or I'm kind of like saying the folks that do remember it, you guys are a little old. So inclusive way of saying it is to just go to the date. Hey, you know, in 1990, this is how we used to do it. We went through a great organizational change. That's a long time ago, but we could take some lessons from it. Something similar like that. Just say the date as opposed to some of y'all are too young to remember it. So inclusive language, vitally important. Let's now take that language and talk about what does inclusive and expert communication look like? Because if you're just a novice at communicating, if you haven't worked hard at being a better communicator, you're doing yourself a disservice. Because being an expert communicator helps you be more inclusive. And I'll give you an example. If you are going to roll something out and you just roll it out without the what and the why behind it, you're excluding some folks that just don't get it. You see, as a leader, you should be doing that always. You should always be talking about what this is you're doing and why you're doing it. Sometimes leaders still hold on to that, and that surprises me. Hey, I know the reason why, but I'm not going to say it. Why? I don't get that. So you have to explain the what as well as the why, because when you do that, you're including now everyone. You're not making any assumptions that Kenny's going to catch on to this faster than someone else. Okay? I talked about this before. One of the worst things you can do as a leader is communicate and take sole credit, right? So, but when you give credit to everyone else, you're now being very, very inclusive. When you say, hey, this was my team accomplished this, and this was a team effort all the way. Look to them and not to me. Now you're being an expert communicator and not a novice. See, a novice or someone that could be new and doesn't know any better always says, hey, I did this, I did this. If you lean on really vague language, right, if you're not specific, or if you try to use words that are too big that you know some people ain't going to understand, and there's some leaders that do that on purpose. I have to be the smartest person in the room, so I'm going to use some really either vague language or big words that people don't understand. That's not a good thing. Bring your message down to earth. Don't be vague. Don't say, hey, a lot of people, or we've had significant gains. Things like that are ineffective. But if you say very specifically, hey, we moved up 5% month over month, that's a great thing. We had, this was a really nice jump for us. It was exactly 5%. You got to be really, really specific. because that also shows people that you've done your homework and you've come to the table and you know your numbers and you're an expert at this and you're an expert communicator. The worst thing you can do, this used to drive me crazy at Old Sprint when I would go to playbook meetings. You remember those. Half of you may remember those, and I'm sure in T-Mobile we had store meetings as well. But when a leader would just read from the playbook and just read the script, I used to be like, why even have the meeting? Just send them the script, right? And let everybody else read it. It's there so that you have the meeting so that you can emphasize what's important. Sum things up in your own words. That makes you an expert communicator. You know why? Because now you're prepared. You have looked it over the night before, and you're prepared, and you're going to put that in your own words. And so when you're an expert communicator, now you're being very inclusive. You're bringing everybody in, and you're talking to the whole team, not just reading a script, which half the team may not get. They could have read it because they may still read it and ask you some questions anyway, right? So be an expert communicator, not a novice communicator. Be an expert communicator. Don't take the easy way out when it comes to communicating. Make sure you do your homework and you're talking in very, very specific language. Okay. The last thing is your behavior. Your behavior as a leader every single day. You're either going to be authentic or you're going to be inauthentic. These days, inauthentic behavior can be sniffed out right away. And if you're an inauthentic leader, then you're not going to be inclusive. You know why? Because people aren't going to work for you. They're not going to want to work for you. Okay, so here's a couple of examples. I already talked about reading directly from a script. If you're authentic, you're going to say, you know what? Let me put this down and let's have a conversation. This is how I feel about this. That's authentic leadership. Authentic leadership right there, right? If everything is over-memorized or choreographed or very stale and very stiff when you are talking, and that could be not just in a meeting, that could also be when you're out there on the floor, if you're running a call or something like that, you want to be able to be your natural self, have natural body language, look people in the eye, and just be yourself, be authentic, be the real you. I was having a conversation with one of my trainers this afternoon, and I was saying how he was sharing with me how his daughter said something that she hears him say online every day when was asked to describe some things that her dad says a lot. And so I asked him, hey, is that something you just say online or do you say it at home as well? And he said, I say it at home all the time as well as in class. Well, here's the thing. We spend so much time at work, it crosses over, right? Worlds collide there, mostly in a good way. The way we are is kind of the way we are. It's hard to have, here's my home personality and here's my work personality. There's some folks that can do that seamlessly. But for the most part, while I may not fully know you, you may not fully know me at home because you're not here with me, for the most part, what you see from me is kind of the way I am at home. And I'm sure that's the way with most of you. And so if you're like that and you're just your natural self, because hear this, your natural self is more than good enough. That's why you got the job, because of your natural self, unless you have folks that aren't being inclusive, right? But you got the job mostly because of your natural self. So be yourself, be natural, be authentic. Don't be a loaf or stoic. You know, I talked about this before on a podcast. It's one thing if you're a little shy. That's okay. You really can't be shy and be a leader during that time. So that's one of those times where maybe at home or in your personal life, you're a little bit less reserved and you're shy, or you're a little bit more reserved and shy. There you do have to turn it on a little bit, right? Then they have to see a little bit. They can see the authentic you still, but that's where you have to really speak up, because if you're a leader of people, you got to talk. You got to be able to lead them. You can't just be quiet all day long, right? And I don't know how else to put that, but aloofness and being stoic and being really, really too quiet, not saying things, not correcting behavior right away in a great, fun way, you're not going to be an authentic leader and have really authentic behavior. Thus, you're also going to be not inclusive because, again, people are not going to know where they stand. So you're only probably going to hire people that you're comfortable with, that doesn't question why you're so quiet. I don't know how else to put that. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. The inclusive leader, it's enough time for talk. We've talked about that for a long time. Now it's time for action on your part, leaders. Be inclusive when it comes to the language that you use. Think about the words that you use all the time, every single day. Be inclusive when it comes to the way you communicate. And be inclusive in your behavior. Make sure you're having those conversations. Make sure you're not being stiff, reading from scripts. We want to hear from you. People want to hear from the leader that's there in their store, in their area, or wherever you're leading. Okay, we've got a lot more to talk about. I've got a great leader that I'm going to be interviewing tomorrow. We'll have that out next week. But for now, this is Kenny with the Yak with Mac. We will talk to you next week.